Uh, uh, Dr. Steve, you got the mic.
It still says I'm in a practice session. Now it says we've started. Hello, everyone. I see people are still joining us. Welcome to today's webinar on early language and literacy, how research informs policy and practice. I'm Stephen Barnett. I'm a professor at Rutgers University and one of the senior co-directors of the National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers. I'll be the moderator for today's panel. This panel is sponsored by the Khalifa International Award for Early Learning. Before we start, I'd like to provide a little bit of background on the Khalifa International Award for Early Learning. This award exemplifies the keenness of the late Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the United Arab Emirates, to encourage research and innovation in early learning and to promote best practice in early childhood education. Initiated by His Highness Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who's Vice President and Deputy Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. 4 awards are made annually, 2 for best research and 2 for best program or practice. For those who may be interested in applying, we encourage you to go to the Khalifa Award website for more information. Today, we have a wonderful opportunity to hear from 3 winners of the Khalifa Award. Their presentations will be followed by a brief question and answer session. Please enter any questions you may have into the chat, and we'll get to as many as possible. That said, I'm delighted to welcome today our speakers, beginning with Professor Catherine McBride. She's Distinguished Professor at Purdue University, and her talk will be on language literacy and learning early support for parental training. And I'll introduce the other speakers as we move on. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Professor McBride.
Good morning. I'm going to try to share my screen now. Let's see how this goes. I'm very grateful to the Khalifa Award personnel and committees for giving us this award. And what I'm going to talk about today is going to integrate what we did for this award, but it's going to be probably broader than that. So here I go. So I want to talk about language literacy and learning, in particular in relation to parental training. I think that when we talk about research, there's been a lot of focus also on social impact of different aspects. So the UK has done a great job of trying to highlight for academics social impact. And we've done a lot of delving into what social impact is. And so these are some of the examples from one book on social impact of how research can inform different aspects for societal impact and progress. So things like innovation, which includes products, but other things as well, systems, service delivery, advocacy, capacity building, and infrastructure. And in my career, I've tried to focus on at least some of these, and that's just what I'm going to highlight right now, how that might work. why do we focus on public policy as academics? I don't think probably anybody attending this seminar maybe has that question. So maybe I'm so-called preaching to the choir, but I do think it's important to reflect, because in academia, we're very busy in all kinds of aspects, but there is value added to a focus on policy. I think most of us go into this research work hoping that we will make some kind of positive difference in society. So American Psychological Association, one of their guidelines is fidelity and responsibility for all trained in psychology. And there's a basic belief that science can help to improve life, and we hope that that can be demonstrated in all of our work. I also think a lot of impact these days, anywhere in the world, is related to communication. People use social media and new technologies to influence others, and hopefully that's for good via research. So some of the impact that I have focused on over the years are these. One is media. Another, probably one of my favorites, was trying to teach with a massive open online course, networking, assessment, inventions, and intervention. I'm going to spend the most time on intervention because that's what the Khalifa Award really focused on. But I'm going to say a little bit about each of these. So here's some examples. I think writing books is useful sometimes, I hope. I think most academics and social sciences, most of the books that there are edited volumes, and those are very helpful, but sometimes it's good to try to explain and focus on an issue in more detail. And in these two books, I've tried to do that in relation to literacy. I mentioned that MOOC. This was a really exciting time. It was in 2019, and based on the books that I just showed you, World Learning, which is an NGO, and we worked together to create this there were 5 different sessions related to how we read around the world. And there were people who were teachers, a lot of parents, a lot of researchers who took this, and it was 100 countries and 10,000 people who looked at it. And these were our advertisements for that. I also think research can be important in networking. One of the things that we found with literacy in relation to participants around the world is that a lot of the research is dominated by, say, Western countries, some in Europe, but most in particular, I would say the US has been pretty dominant in literacy research. And we really wanted to highlight the fact that there are lots of different scripts and languages, the most, in fact, if you just count by languages and scripts, represented in Asia. So we started this Association for Reading and Writing in Asia in 2016. And we're very proud of that. If any of you are interested, we're having our annual meeting in Cebu in the Philippines in February. We have a call for papers right now. But I am proud of this because I think that it's really stimulated new research across people. And we've had people from NGOs as well as researchers joining, because we all recognize the fact that worldwide, the majority of the world are multilingual and often biscriptal, learning more to read in more than one script. Other research that I've done has focused on basic cognitive processes and how they're related to literacy. And one of the examples of this is some of the studies we did informed the Hong Kong Dyslexia Early Screening Scale. Hong Kong is an interesting place to look at literacy because children begin training in reading so early. So they start getting homework around 4 years old. And so by the time they're 6 or 7, if they're not reading well, that's a big deal for catching up. So we really focused on this early. So these children are in kindergarten, K1 to K3, and we can do screening to find those who are at risk for reading difficulties and kind of start the interventions early. Some of our research has even resulted in some so-called inventions. So we've created, like, we created a card game to try to get kids more interested in creativity with morphemes. We also created an English word reading test online. That's about 10 minutes. If any of you need a word reading test of 10 minutes, we are offering that free. We've been collecting data on it for the last few years. And the reason I think that's important is no matter where you are in the world, often learning English as an additional language is useful for educational or work-related purposes, even if it's a distant language for you. And so having a very short, sort of quick and dirty test to screen for word reading difficulties is useful. And then what I really want to focus on today, because it's been the basis of the Khalifa Award, is interventions. And we've been very fortunate that in the last 10 years, we were able to partner with Arcanis, which is an early learning foundation, and they are based in Cebu in the Philippines. They focus on early learning for the poorest families. And what we've managed to do in this work is to integrate training for parents on both literacy-related skills, language, and mathematics. So the way the way that this has worked is that we are trying to focus on parents and training those parents. So in the beginning, we would meet the parents wherever they were, some of them at home, some of them in their businesses, some I remember, for example, selling things on the street in a stall, wherever the parents and the children happened to be. We worked with the parents of children ages 3 to 6 to share with them this, which is a just little card game with numbers and various fun animal creatures. And we came up with lots of different games for the children to count these creatures, to figure out if there was one more of these creatures, how many would there be, and just to play a variety of games and to teach parents effective ways to talk with their children about mathematics related concepts. What we found was that a lot of parents understand the idea of, say, reading a book with their children. They didn't do as much with playing mathematics games. And we found that these were kind of integrated. And in a lot of our work, we focus both on language skills, reading, and also mathematics. So the idea is that there was a lot of ecological validity. That is, the training took place wherever the families were most comfortable. We also worked with a lot of newly trained teachers. So we sought out those who just graduated and train them to work with these families. And what we found was that especially when the teachers worked one-on-one with the families, only for maybe 15 minutes twice a week or so, but that sort of showed them how you could play these games with the children and how it could be fun and just kind of the approach that you could take, that the parents really caught on quite quickly. They liked it and they kept it going. So we had good results individually on both math and language skills, and some crossover from language to math in some of the studies we did. This has also been adapted by NGOs for group training. And so here's one of the studies that we published on parent coaching on Filipino children's numeracy, language, and literacy skills. And what we found is that there's some crossover, because as you're learning mathematics, you really need that language background to do it well. And so we were very pleased with this. We've also been following those children up. We found some results 6 months later to show that these effects had continued. We also just came out with a new paper that I was very pleased about on whether or not this training could work online. Because as we all know, COVID made everything in terms of learning difficult. And we were very curious, maybe a little pessimistic about whether training parents online would actually work in any way. We worked with the trainers. We trained them online. One of the best aspects of all of this is that we could communicate with people in the Philippines, from Hong Kong and from Malaysia and all over. We could just do those kinds of things because of the internet. Of course, the downside is we really wanted to target the poorest families, but there are definitely equity issues with Wi-Fi and those kinds of things. So we could only include families who we could actually reach. And this was an interesting study. There were two aspects of it. One was, how is all this intervention related to parents and how they feel via parent questionnaires? And the other was, how is it related to how the children performed over time? And what we found was that the parent questionnaire hypotheses, we didn't find any evidence, but we did find that this training was useful in promoting children's mathematics skills very clearly. And it was very impressive how that worked. This study is the first study I've ever participated in where pre-testing, post-testing, and training all took place online. These are on the Arcanis website. These are just a couple of the children who they featured with family, and you can look at it. I don't think you have time to read all this, but you know, young children and their parents who are relatively pleased and happy that they've participated in this kind of training. They feel like it's really given their children a leg up when they start primary school. So I think from all of this work that we've been able to participate in related to language literacy and mathematics, there are some lessons to be learned in integrating research with public policy. One is social impact based on research can be done for profit or for charity or a combination of both, but it's important to consider sustainability. That is a long-term goal. It is really problematic when you go in, you find something works, and then there's no more resources to continue it. We're very proud of the work that I just showcased in Cebu because it is part of a longer-term program across two different organizations who are reaching a lot of different families. It's also important in this work to be flexible. It's important to constantly review how you're going about things and to focus particularly on community involvement. There are lots of adjustments that we made over the years in how we assess the children and training, where it took place, how it took place. We're still trying to adjust that to meet community needs as they come about. Collaborations with community partners require time, energy, and trust. That takes a while to build up. And so we really appreciate all community partners. Thank you, anyone who's willing to partner with researchers to work together to try to create better programs. And it's important that you have some internal motivation to accomplish this work. Lots of people have different perspectives on what works best, and this takes tenacity, patience, and humility. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop sharing now. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Our next speaker is Dr. Laura Justice. Laura is Distinguished Professor at The Ohio State University, and her talk today is on promoting early literacy skills through research-based practice. Thank you for joining us, Laura.
Great, thank you, Steve. I am trying to get my slides going. Hopefully that works now. How does that look? Good. I'm impressed you switched my name. For some reason I woke up and my internet didn't work. So thank you, Steve and others, for troubleshooting with me. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everybody who's joining in. It's an honor to be invited to be a participant, a panelist in this webinar that's focused on, I believe, translating research to policy. And Dr. McBride, I'm really glad I got to catch the end of that. That was absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to talk about a topic very similar to Dr. McBride's, promoting early literacy skills through research-based practices. I'm saying hello I'm actually very close to Professor McBride. I'm dialing in from Ohio, part of the American Midwest. I am here and Dr. McBride is right over here. So we're practically neighbors. And this is my beautiful campus at Ohio State University. I welcome everybody to come visit. Just reach out so we make sure we've got the weather boiled down. So I missed the first part of Professor McBride's presentation, so she might have gone over this, but the foundational premise to pretty much everything that we're talking about is that there is a longitudinal, consistent relationship between the skills that children have in preschool and their future reading comprehension. So this is actually a 20-year-old paper, but it was extremely influential. And what this is a structural equation modeling. And if you hate statistics, ignore the details. But what this is a longitudinal study where kids' skills are measured for oral language and what we're going to call code-related literacy skills when they're 3 and 4 years of age. And what scientists do in research like this is they get a large number of kids, in this case at preschool, and then they continue to measure their skills as they go to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade. And a study like this, while it seems overly complicated, shows something really simple. And it's that the skills that children have at age 3 and 4 are significantly and positively related to the skills that they have several years later. So put simply, children in preschool who have well-developed literacy and language skills tend to have well-developed reading skills 4 and 5 years down the road. So it leads us to consider as scientists, if our concern is children having reading difficulties at, say, 3rd and 4th grade, can we prevent those by boosting early language and literacy skills 4 and 5 years into history? In other words, if we have a 3 and 4-year-old child right now, given the longitudinal relations between their skills at age 3 and 4 and their future reading, if we boost those skills early in development, can we actually enhance future reading achievement and conversely reduce risks for reading problems? And this is a premise that has been advocated for over 20 years, this notion of preventing reading difficulties by promoting early literacy skills rather than focusing on remediation once children exhibit reading difficulties in the primary grades, at which time it's actually really difficult to remediate these difficulties. So a lot of this panel today is really about the science of early literacy and language development with an eye towards prevention of difficulties later down the road. And this work has global significance. Whether you're in a developing country like Cebu or a developed country I'm not trying to be pejorative here, but like in the United States or Denmark or Hong Kong or many countries across sub-Saharan Africa, preventing reading difficulties is a universal phenomenon that we're all struggling with in, the 21st century, as we require our workforce to be able to read and write competently. So this is a global issue. So what I want to talk about is an early developmental phenomenon called print knowledge. Print knowledge is very simply the young children's developing knowledge of what print is as a fundamental symbolic system that's absolutely required to become a reader and a writer. And I know Professor McBride has done very important work in this area, as well as many scholars across the globe. But print knowledge, so we're all familiar with oral language, or the spoken words and sentences kids produce. Written language, which is required for literacy, is taking our language and basically writing it down and encoding it using print and sound. So as young children are developing, age 2, age 3, age 4, age 5, for them to eventually transition to becoming a reader and working with the symbol systems of print and sound, they have to understand how print works. And more importantly, they have to understand that a written word, like this word brave, is an invariant representation of the spoken word. Brave, spoken as a word, is represented as an invariant representation of letters and sounds. So a lot of my work over 25 years has focused on how do children develop print knowledge? Is it a universal phenomenon that's important across the world's language? If a child's learning Arabic or Mandarin or English or Spanish, and indeed it is. And how can we promote it when kids are quite young as potentially a route towards improving future reading and reducing risks for reading difficulties? So there are two fundamental understandings about print knowledge that have emerged in the last 20 years as a function of science. Number one is that children's print knowledge is a universal cognitive prerequisite for reading. Whether a child's learning Mandarin or English or Spanish or Danish, if they're going to be literate in that language, they have to understand how print works in that language. So it's universal, it transcends the world's written languages. And number two, it's causally related to future reading. In other words, if we promote children's print knowledge when they're young, it can lead to causal improvements in future reading. So I'm going to dig into this a little bit more. One intervention that we have developed to improve young children's print knowledge, it's called Sit Together and Read. We've been studying, revising this for over 20 years, and this is an intervention or instructional approach that's been used across many of the world's languages. Prominently, we've tested this in Spanish, we've tested this in English, we've had scholars test this in French, etc. This is really, really simple. So what it means, sit together and read, is that when an adult reads a book with a young child, as they read, they pay attention to and talk about the print in the book. So I'm just using Brave because the print is so prominent here. Sit together and read involves using a teaching strategy called print referencing. As we read a book with a child, we talk about the print as well as the illustrations. So if I'm a teacher reading this book with my pupils, I might say, oh, look, we're reading the book Brave. He looks so brave. And this is the word brave. B-R-A-V-E, brave. That's the title of the book. So what I have done is made the pictures in the storyline a prominent feature of the discussion, as well as the print. And the reason this is important is because when adults read with young children, they do anything but talk about the print. When we read books with kids, we want to talk about the pictures, we want to talk about the storylines, and we tend to ignore the print in the book, perhaps because we think it's not that interesting. But I can assure you that young developing children do find print quite interesting. Kids are very curious creatures. So print referencing involves simply talking about the print as we read with kids. So we might say things like, this is the title of the book. What do you think this says? This is a letter B. It makes the book sound. Show me a long word on this page. We're just integrating these simple comments and questions about print as we read along in the book. So I'm going to move quickly. I only have about 2 more minutes. So we have done a number of very large scale studies of sit together and read. This is a study we did with teachers, preschool teachers in Ohio, where they got a book a week for 30 weeks over the academic year. And we guided teachers to read with their kids. And as they read a book a week 4 times, talk about print, make it an object of your attention in your read aloud. So a given week, they got Rumble in the Jungle, and they were asked to talk about concept of letter as they read and what a word is by talking about the word zebra. So I'm going to run through this. This study, as well as many others by other teams looking at print knowledge, have shown that when kids are exposed to sit together and read by teachers and or their caregivers, we see a significant boost in measures of print knowledge, like print concepts, alphabet knowledge, name writing. And importantly, those early boosts in print knowledge lead to generalized effects on measure of, this is word recognition, spelling, and reading comprehension 2 years post-intervention. So in this study, we followed about 500 kids who were exposed to sit together and read during preschool. We followed those kids to kindergarten and 1st grade. And what we saw is on standardized measures of reading, we saw about 1/4 of a standard deviation unit jump in their reading skills 2 years later. So this seminar is about, we're all scientists. How does our work inform research and policy? And so what I wanted to comment is that after 20 years of research on sit together and read, reading aloud with a reference to print is now considered an essential early literacy practice based on common early literacy instructional frameworks. In this particular guide of 10 essential practices, it's number 2. When we read to kids in our classrooms, we want to read aloud with a reference to print. And when you look at large-scale advocacy organizations like the National Association for the Education of Young Children, their newer policy documents explicitly talk about teaching kids to be print navigators, and they cite research on the use of print referencing. And so, like all of my colleagues who are here, including our moderator, Steve Barnett, we're doing science not to do science. We're doing science to promote the common good and societal improvements with an emphasis on boosting the developmental outcomes of young children. So thank you very much. If you have questions, please do feel free to reach out. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Justice. Our final speaker today is Dr. Gillian West, a lecturer in language sciences, development and disorders at University College London. And she's going to speak with us about language enrichment in the early years, in particular program development and implementation at scale. One of the most challenging issues that our field faces is not just how to identify best practice and what we should do with young children, but how to make that happen effectively at scale. So I think this would be an exciting and useful presentation. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. So I will share my screen. Let me, hopefully that will come through. I hope everyone can see that now. And yeah, great. So yes, first of all, thank you very much to Khalifa for having me on this this webinar, and indeed for the award for last year for one of our interventions. So what I want to talk to you about today is about the language enrichment programs that we've developed for children in the early years. So I'll talk a little bit about a couple of programs. I'm going to focus on one because it's the first one that was developed. It's the one that we have most evidence for, and it's already at scale. But at the end, I'm going to circle back to the second intervention, which is actually the one that won the prize last year. And these interventions started in the UK, but they're increasingly now available elsewhere outside of the UK. So I'm going to look at these interventions. I'm going to also look briefly at some of the evidence to effectiveness. And then what I want to do is drill down into some of the kind of critical factors that we've incorporated in these interventions to ensure that they can be successfully implemented at scale. So I'm just going to set the scene briefly first. So really where we're starting with is oral language skills and children having good oral language skills. And really that is the most critical thing in education in the early years. So oral language skills provide the foundation for literacy, but really more broadly, they provide the foundation for all of formal education, arguably for all of cognitive development. And yet a significant number of children reach school with language skills that are not at a level to allow them to get the most out of their education. And indeed, we know that around 7 to 10% of children have really significant language difficulties. And we also know that these that language skills are strongly correlated with social disadvantage. And so that suggests that if we can work to improve language skills early in education, then that might be a really good place to concentrate when we're trying to reduce social inequalities. And additionally, and this is particularly the case in the UK, but I think also very widely elsewhere, we have increasingly more and more children who come to school from homes where English isn't the first language that's spoken at home. And so these children can come to school with additional disadvantages in terms of having language skills that have not had they've not had enough opportunities yet to develop compared to perhaps monolingual peers. And I think what I'm going to show, and one of the things I'm going to focus on when I'm talking is that language difficulties can be quite hard to spot. So particularly in young children, these language difficulties can be hidden. Children themselves can do quite a bit to camouflage that. If they're struggling in a classroom environment, they may well just be quiet and well-behaved, copy others, etc. But especially if they've got issues with their understanding of language, it can be really quite hard to spot those children. But what we have done with our interventions is build in a method whereby children can be screened and can be accurately and reliably identified as benefiting from intervention or needing intervention. And equally, this screening can then evaluate the progress that they make over time. And also in the work, I guess, that I'm going to talk about today, what I want to be able to show fairly conclusively now, I think, is that interventions, school-based interventions to improve oral language skills can be really highly effective. And our interventions are delivered by either trained teachers or trained teaching assistants. And again, we've shown that that can be a very effective way to support children's language development. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about and really focus on is the scaling of interventions. So here we're talking about using the principles of implementation science. So really what we're doing in our work is a kind of cross between cognitive and developmental psychology and implementation science. So we're looking at interventions that we know to be effective, and then also ascertaining how those interventions can remain effective when they're delivered at scale. So the intervention I'm going to talk about most is the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, NELI. So NELI is a 20-week program for children in the UK. That's children who are in reception. So that's the first year of school. So in the UK, that's age 4 to 5, but it doesn't need to be elsewhere. I know that it's now delivered to children up to the age of around 7, I think. But these are children then who are identified at school entry as having poor language skills. So it works on a withdrawal model. Schools identify these children who need additional support, and then they're taken out of the classroom to receive NELI. And it's designed to improve children's vocabulary, and it also focuses on developing their narrative skills and their active listening skills, and really focuses hard on building their confidence in speaking. So it uses, in terms of vocabulary development, it uses a multi-contextual approach. So it's giving children lots and lots of opportunities to hear and say words, new words, and then in narrative terms, it's enabling children to use those words and scaffolding them and using those words in sort of ever more complex and cohesive speech. So NELI is it's a manualized program. It's fully scripted, and as I said, it's delivered by trained teaching assistants. Now, NELI has been developed over 15 plus years. I think what I'll probably touch on there is this reinforces quite an unfortunate finding that comes from healthcare that I came across not too long ago, that it takes on average about 17 years for just 14% of research to benefit practice. Now that's finding from healthcare, but I think the same can be said about education too. And so some of what we're wanting to do in this work that we're doing with implementation and implementation science is to find ways to speed that process up. Because it's just too long. When we're doing such wonderful work in universities and with research, we want to be able to get it out there so it's supporting children. So NELI has had a good number of trials, efficacy trials and effectiveness trials, and I'm just going to focus on the last big research trial that NELI had that was back in 2017-18, was a cluster randomized control trial funded by the EEF, which is the sort of works clearinghouse for the UK, and it included it was 193 schools, I think, and just shy of 6,000 children were involved in that trial. So children were screened, first of all, to identify those who would benefit most from the NELI intervention, and then randomized into groups, an intervention group and a control group. The intervention group then delivered the intervention, and then both before and afterwards there were a battery of language assessments and other assessments that were given to the children. And so what we were able to show with this trial is that in terms of standardized language assessments, so these are generalized measures, children who'd received NELI made significantly more progress in developing their language skills than children in the control group. So we've got an effect size here of 0.26 in terms of educational interventions. That is really a meaningful effect size, especially when we're talking about a large-scale randomized control trial like this. I know effect sizes can be a little difficult to interpret, but it equates to about 3 months additional progress on top of the progress anyway that children in the control group would have made in developing their language in that time. In terms of the screening assessment that we gave children, of which more later, the effect size was slightly larger. It's equivalent to about 4 months additional progress. And we were also able to show that children had improved in terms of their behavioral adjustment to school. So this is a teacher rating, but again, the effect size is commensurate with this, with the effect size found for language improvements. It wasn't mediated by improvements in language. It was a separate mechanism when we were measuring directly after the trial, but a great finding nevertheless. We're delighted then in being able to go back and follow up these children 2 years later to show that the effects on language were largely sustained. So fade out is a real issue for us in doing our intervention work. It can be quite hard to measure. It's quite expensive for a start to go back and measure children later on. There isn't a huge amount of follow-up literature out there, but in the literature that is there, it does show quite often that the effects of successful interventions can fade out over time. So finding that effect still largely sustained is really wonderful news. And even better is that at this stage, 2 years later, it's generalized to effects on reading, both decoding and on reading comprehension. So we're really delighted with that. As a direct result of this effectiveness trial, when the pandemic hit, in response to COVID, the Department for Education in the UK announced funding for the rollout of Nellie to English primary schools, really concentrating on schools with high levels of social deprivation. And we were able to reach over 6,000 schools in the first year. We exceeded the goals that had been set for us, and further funding was made available the following year, and we reached 4,000 more. And funding now still in place for the 4th year and sustaining that delivery of Nellie in those schools. So that's about that number of schools equates. It's about 2/3 of the primary schools in England who've been able to receive Nellie now. And the implementation of that programme that we did was really conducted within an implementation science framework. So I have one here that's taken from healthcare, but it really thinks about the delivery context, the individuals, the different stakeholders involved, the delivery processes you need to have in place, the barriers and facilitators that you're likely to come across. And so this, as I say, the one that's cited there is from healthcare, but I think is just as relevant in education too. But there's been some wonderful work recently published by Rosanna Comezidou and Tiffany Hogan, really extending and formalizing that for education. So really, I think implementation science in terms of educational interventions is now going forward with leaps and bounds. Anyway, this is effectively what we have tried to implement with Nellie. So I'm now going to take a little step back from the programme and think about what we need to have in place if we're going to implement this at scale. What do we need to have in place for Nellie in order for it to be successful out in the real world? It's a targeted intervention. So the first thing is it's really, really important to make sure that the right children are receiving it. So we have a language screener. I mentioned that really briefly at the beginning. Language Screen, which is an automated app. It runs on a touchscreen tablet or a smartphone. And what this does is delivers screening of children directly into the hands of teachers. So it enables them to identify the children that need support in their classrooms, and it enables them to evaluate the progress that the children have made at the end of delivery. It's a very easy to use app. There's no training needed. The scoring of the subtests in it are automated within the app. And there's 4 subtests. There's an expressive vocabulary subtest, receptive vocabulary, a test of sentence repetition, which we know is a very good test of grammatical language skills, and listening comprehension. And importantly, the results are standardized. So that means that schools can make really meaningful comparisons both between school pupils, but also for school pupils over time. These results are age standardized. So that means that they can use this screening and they can use the intervention as part of a tiered approach to supporting language in their schools. So determined by children's response to intervention, the bulk of children who make good progress in NELI, that's great, but there will always be children who have really significant language needs, probably in every classroom, and this is a good way to identify the children that haven't made the expected progress by screening them at the end, seeing that their response to the intervention hasn't been strong, and then more specialist or longer term support for those children can be put in place. So I think that's also a very important part of what this intervention does. Anyway, by the end of the 2 years of the rollout, we'd been able to use Language Screen in over 10,000 schools, had screened just shy of 500,000 children. It's a lot more than that now. So we're very, very pleased with that. We've got a wealth of data from that. And as I say, it's ongoing. Tell you a little bit more about how it works from a school's perspective. So I mentioned these age standardized scores, which are very powerful for schools. They're really simple to understand. So the subtests are combined into a single age standardized score of language ability, and schools receive results for those children so they can see the subtest scores, but they can also see this overall score, and they can use that to help support the child. Importantly, the results can be downloaded by the schools, not just individually for children, but also for classes. So this is a class where the children are ranked. So those children who have the most language needs are at the top, and then so on down to the children who are have done best at the bottom of the list. And so what that allows teachers to do is really see quite easily which children are going to benefit most from a targeted intervention like NELI. So we make it as simple as we possibly can for schools. We use a traffic light system for them as well to help. So the other really important scaling factor that I wanted to talk about is the training for school staff. And I think, again, this is a really, really important part of what we do with our language interventions. When we were running research trials of NELI, our training for practitioners was always face-to-face. It was always a really important part of what we did. So it was quite intensive. We would take practitioners out of school and give them 2, possibly even more days worth of training. In the effectiveness trial for NELI that I talked about at the beginning, we also trained classroom teachers as well as teaching assistants so that they were really understood what was going on in these sessions and were part of the solution in supporting the delivery of these sessions. So that's something that we've carried on doing. But when we're talking about training staff in thousands of schools, it's really not logistically possible to do face-to-face training, and it's not cost effective either. So in terms of scaling up and making sure that that the training can reach teachers and teaching assistants when they need it to, we needed to pivot to a new model. And so we devised a new online training and support model. And we were really intent on it retaining the qualities of our face-to-face training, but we wanted to make it even better. And I think that we've been quite successful in that. So how does this training work? Well, it's asynchronous, so it's incredibly flexible. So any teaching assistant or teacher can log on to the training. They can complete it at their own pace when they want to. They can do huge chunks of it, little bite-sized pieces, and so it's incredibly flexible in that way. But it's just as comprehensive as our face-to-face training was. So it doesn't just tell you how to deliver the intervention. It starts, almost half of it, in fact, is really about the importance of oral language. What is oral language? What are the component skills that are included in oral language? What are the techniques that educators can use to support the development of oral language? And what strategies can they put in place? What are the strategies that are used within the program, etc.? And then it, of course, guides the practitioners through delivery of the program so that they are able to do that as effectively as possible. The other thing that we really focused on with this online model, especially when you think that it's asynchronous, is maintaining this interactivity that one would have if one were doing it face-to-face. That's a really important focus. We aim to build a real community of practice around the NALI training that we do. So there's online mentors that are available that support the learning and are really on every step of the course supporting these discussion boards with peers mentoring other peers and so on. So that's been very effective. We've now sort of many hundreds of thousands of comments that are available for any new learner to come on board to see. And the really wonderful thing as well about this model is it's not a one-time only training solution. So when you're delivering face-to-face, you're limited to when that training runs. The good thing about this, when you're trying to do this at scale, is that if you lose your NALI practitioner halfway through a year, or even somebody new starting, you don't lose your expertise. You can just sign up a new trainee to the course. They can be trained and they can get going. So in that way, it's helping the sustainability of NALI in schools too. We've also been able to build now a really large video library of actual sessions of NALI, a best practice with commentary mapped to the reporting and target setting that practitioners can do. So we're really helping to upskill teaching assistants so that they're doing a really wonderful job in schools with this program. So in the first 3 years of rolling out, we'd trained nearly 50,000 teachers. Again, it's a lot more than that by now. And as of 2022, we had official accreditation by the Continued Professional Development Service. So that's recognition that this is really meaningful training for educators to have. I'm running out of time here. So a word quickly, I won't go into a lot of detail here, but it's really important for us to ascertain how effective NALI is when it's rolled out. We can't do a randomized control trial because we haven't got a control group. So what can we do? We can pivot to another way of analysing our results because we have language screen data from before and after the intervention is given to classrooms of children, thankfully. So this is a regression discontinuity design that we can use, which then compares performance of children that receive NALI, and it compares that performance with children who just miss out on being assigned to NALI. And effectively, the effect of the intervention then is the difference between the outcomes for this intervention group compared to the comparison group. So if we look at this graph very briefly, what we're trying to find with this is if we have this cutoff in language screen here, this along the x-axis is their baseline language screen scores. So any children on this right-hand side are going to be the comparison group, and any children on this side are going to be the NALI group that we're looking at. And here's the language screen cutoff. So if we map the post language screen scores on the y-axis and run a regression on the comparison group, we can see this is the line of best fit here. And if we extrapolate this down, this would be the line we'd expect the intervention group to be on if they had not received NALI. And what we're hoping to find is that that's not where those children are. They're actually up here where the green line is. And this gap here is the intervention effect. So that's what we want to do with the regression discontinuity design. And I'm very quickly just going to show you what we found for NALI. So it's exactly the pattern that we found. And in fact, we're able to show that children in the rollout improved. The effect size there was about 2.23. So again, that's about 4 months additional progress. But for children with free school meals, that effect size is actually nearly 0.6. So that's a really large effect size for those children who one would expect to be most disadvantaged. So this is an independent evaluation commissioned by the EEF. We're extending this at the moment to include more children from both years of the rollout. And that work is just about to undergo peer review, but is not published yet. And then very quickly, I'm going to cycle back because I'm running out of time to the program that won the award last year, the Khalifa Award last year. So this is a program for preschool language enrichment program, and it functions, if you like, for children with poor language in the same way that NELI functions, but it also has an additional layer, so a universal layer. So it enables practitioners to deliver language support to the entire class, and then also take those children identified as having poor language skills and give them more support. And it's based around the principles of shared book reading and guided play. And we have been able to design it from the outset with scaling in mind based on the learnings from NELI. And last year, we had a very successful RCT with 65 schools. And we are just launching this week the largest randomized controlled trial we're aware of in the early years, with 320 settings, so around about 10,000 children. So that's launching this week. So slightly bated breath, but we're hoping to find similar results for NELI preschool in this much larger sample of preschools. So I'm going to just very quickly sum up. So NELI and NELI preschool have been shown to improve children's language skills in the early years. They're consistent with the aims of a tiered approach to language support. They're scalable, and that's what I hope that I've shown today. Screenings conducted by schools using Language Screen, this automated app. Staff training is asynchronous, completely online. And I think that has really huge implications for improving educational attainment for children in the UK and beyond. And I say beyond because NELI is now available in Australia, New Zealand, America. We've got a Dutch language version available in Holland. A Spanish language version is about to be available, and NELI Preschool is also about to launch in Australia and New Zealand. So we're really hoping to be able to bring this to as many places as we possibly can to support language development in children. So I will stop there. Thank you very much, and thanks to all the funders that made the work possible, and a truly amazing and committed team of researchers at our various universities and within Oxed, which is the spin-out company that now supports the implementation of these interventions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. West, and also Professors McBride and Justice. And we have some questions. I'll start with the narrowest questions and then go to the broad ones. The first questions for Dr. West about NELI. Could you clarify the age range that NELI could be used for?
Yes, absolutely. So in the UK, it's been designed and it's been tested most widely in children in the first year of formal education. So that's age 4 to 5. During the first year of the rollout, with all of the lockdowns in place in the UK, it was extended very frequently to be delivered to children in year 1. So that's age another year older. But in fact, in the work that we're doing, certainly in America and in Australia and New Zealand, it's really being able to be delivered to children up to the age of about 7. So while it might be a little easy for children with good language skills at 7, those children who have weak language skills really still benefit from it right up until that point.
Thank you. And the second question, now moving to Professor McBride. Dr. West provided a lot of detail about the screening and identification of children with reading difficulties. Could you say a little bit more about your studies and how you identified the language literacy difficulties?
Right. I should have clarified. We just took anybody who wanted to be in our study. We were targeting those of lower socioeconomic status because the feeling was that those families' children do less well in school. Just like Dr. Justice was talking about, kind of you're disadvantaged. If you're disadvantaged early, it tends to show up later in development as well. And so we just took all the families who we from neighborhoods where we thought where we advertised. We had for that one, we really needed parents to cooperate with the children. It was a big time commitment. And so, and we also thought that the children were ages 3 to 5. So it's not that easy to participate in such activities. So there was not an at-risk population in that particular group.
Okay, so it's universal, but but targeting by neighborhoods with high levels of social disadvantage.
Right. We had a series of studies. I showed, I think, 1 or 2 of them, but over the years, we've done several, again, targeting lower SES, but we've also done some with middle SES as well at different times.
Okay, and I've been remiss not to say earlier that as this is being recorded, the video will be available through the Khalifa Award for anyone who wants to see it later. So hopefully we'll get this out to a even larger audience than we have online today. And for those of you who want to follow up, you can see that the Khalifa Award for Education has a YouTube channel. So that we can get this to not only to a much wider audience, but those of you who want to follow up on the details, because there's a lot of information, very rich today, can go back and review and see the slides. Now there's a very broad question that I'm going to amplify and hope that each of you might weigh in on, which is, why are there so few, given their importance, why are there so few rigorous longitudinal studies? And I actually think the answer to that is probably relatively easy. The harder question, if you could address it, is what could be done? What can the audience and others do to try to support the increase in the number of rigorous longitudinal studies in children's learning and development?
Well, Dr. Justice, maybe you start. But
well, I was going to answer the easy part, and then Cammie, you can do the hard part. You can do part 2. So just briefly, since the question was asked, the reason there's few longitudinal studies, in part, the simple answer is, number one, they're really expensive. So if we want to follow kids, say, for 3 years, and that costs $3 million, double that for longitudinal. But the other thing is, it's really challenging to maintain your participants. And so I'm involved in several longitudinal studies right now, and especially if you're working with disadvantaged persons, disadvantaged kids, they're incredibly transient and their families are experiencing enormous trauma. And so to maintain contact, we have one study that started with about 350 kids born into poverty in Ohio, and I think we've maintained about 70% of them over time. But it's really hard to continue to follow people. Kids move around. They experience trauma and suddenly have to leave out of state. And so they're just really hard. So, but part two for Dr. McBride is, what was it, Steve? You said, how can everyone something?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is, so how do we increase the financial support? Is it that people don't know how important it is? That policy, that governments are underinvesting in education research generally? And is there any advice on how we might influence that?
So I would like to attempt, well, I will just give my own opinion, because I participated in a longitudinal study that started with children who were between 12 and 20 months. And in Beijing, we followed a lot of them till they got to be 17 or 18. And we tried to do the same thing in Hong Kong. And these are two Chinese cities, but they have different systems. Hong Kong, we really lost track of them much more quickly. And in Beijing, we kept track of them more easily, partly because a lot of them were connected with hospitals. And the doctors saw some utility in maintaining that. But I think a broad answer to your question is yes, governments often change over a short period of time in many places. One leader of a city changes to another leader, and different people have different priorities. I've not really seen too many grants that would go beyond 5 years. But I think we do know from the research, as Dr. Justice mentioned very well, that anything that we invest when the children are younger, it really shows, it shows up a lot over time, and we will save a lot of money if we, for example, do interventions early. It's just difficult for different leaders to see that and to honor that over time. So one answer might be that governments in general try to keep this in mind. There's enough evidence for it now, and set aside some funding specifically for longer longitudinal studies. That is my dream.
And I think another point that you made there is that the capacity of data systems to support this differ dramatically from place to place, even within the same country.
Yeah. So I was just going to reiterate exactly what Laura had said, actually, in terms of why aren't there more at the expense? They're really hard to do. Attrition, both at a school level and at a child level, is always a real issue. But we do need more of them, and just some thoughts about what maybe we could do in terms of that is make it more of a priority, or help support funders in making it more of a priority, that the projects are longitudinal, that there is a longitudinal focus, to continue work to identify reliable measures that can be used more widely, because that in turn, if these longitudinal studies are then consistently reported, enables the results of these few studies that there are to work harder, because you can use the results as part of meta-analyses, for example. Another thing that I think that that we need to do is try to limit the attrition. So we need to really work hard to make it as easy as possible for schools, for settings to do. And I think maybe part of this funding issue, especially, well, certainly in the UK, where capacity is such an issue, is to be able to incentivize schools to take part in it. So schools can start being part of a longitudinal study with the best of intentions, and just find that they fall by the wayside by the end, because it's just too much. Now, if there is support there for them, both in terms of sort of managing the work that they need to do, but also financially, then that is going to help limit attrition. So I think that's important. And the last thing I was going to say is, I think that we need to make it count. So what happens when you do a longitudinal study and you get these results that are so incredibly valuable? What happens afterwards? So we need to make that part of, if you like, a pipeline, a sort of research to practice pipeline, and we need to be working very hard with policymakers to be able to span that sort of last step in the road from testing these interventions and testing things longitudinally to getting them out in practice.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I'd like to thank our panelists for generously providing their time and knowledge with us today. I thank the Khalifa Award for Education for sponsoring this, and tell everyone, stay tuned. This will be available on YouTube and promoted through social media. So thank you once again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day and evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.